Hi guys, welcome back to the Mina Does Art Stuff YouTube channel. My name is Mina and on this channel we do art stuff. Today I'm going to be doing a video about Quinacridone Gold, or like just basically a Quinacridone Gold comparison. This is something that I've been wanting to do since I started my channel. It is one of my favorite colours and I'm planning on doing this is like a little mini series, I guess, comparing some of my favorite colors and the variations between different brands of the same color or pigment. So let me know down below in the comments which colors you'd like to see comparisons of. I definitely think things like sap green is one of my favorites, and olive green, and what's the other one, like cobalt teal or cobalt turquoise. There's lots of colours that I would love to do this sort of series with, but if you have a particular favourite that you'd like to see a comparison of, then please let me know in the comments below. This isn't going to be a super technical deep dive. I know there's another channel called Dr. Otokano. She does these colossal colour showdown videos. They're really good, really informative, and great for like more nitty-gritty details about like colour comparisons of different brands of different particular colors. So definitely worth checking that out, and if I remember I will leave a link to her Colossal Color Showdown playlist because it's definitely worth checking out and I love all of her videos. So I guess in some way this is somewhat inspired by that, but it's not trying to be that at all. And I really wanted to start with Quinacridone Gold for a number of reasons. First of all, the original Quinacridone Gold pigment was a pigment called PO49, so Pigment Orange 49, and that got discontinued years ago, and then I think a few years ago the last stocks of it ran out basically, and it's now considered extinct in the watercolor world. You can't buy PO49 from any commercially available brands. I think there are a couple of handmade watercolor artists that produce PO49 Quinacridone Gold paints. I have one of them here by a company called Nightshade Watercolors. I did a video on this little palette and I will link that down below as well for you guys. So I have an original PO49 from this handmade watercolor palette. I also, as luck would have it, I don't know how I got so lucky, have a tube of the original PO49 by Daniel Smith. A few years ago when I first started with watercolors and once I started investing in higher quality paints, I won a job lot of Daniel Smith paints on eBay. And it came with like 50 odd tubes of watercolors, a lot of duplicates and stuff, and I resold some of them and passed on to friends, etc. But one of the tubes was an original tube of PO49, so I have that as well to use in this comparison. So we have two variations of PO49 of the original, now no longer like discontinued Quinacridone Gold to look at, to compare all the different hues against. I have two additional colors that I don't have in tubes, so I'll just run through all the different variations that we're going to be looking at today. I've got the current version of Quinacridone Gold from Daniel Smith, M. Graham, Core, Da Vinci, Winsor & Newton, Sennelier, Jackson's Artist Watercolor line, White Knights, Schmincke Horadam, Michael Harding, Turner, and in palettes I have the Roman Schmall, their original version of Quinacridone Gold. They've now come out with a hue version, which I will explain in a minute, and Holbein. Those two I have in the palettes. Recently, so as of like a few months ago, I believe now, it was announced that PO48, which is known as Quinacridone Burnt Orange, and once Quinacridone Gold, the original PO49 pigment, became discontinued, a lot of brands started making Quinacridone Gold using a combination of PO48 and PY150. So I think I have three of them here, and then the two others in pans, the Holbein and Roman Schmall, use that combination of PO48 and PY150. Then these four brands use a combination of PY150 and PR206. So PR206 is another pigment that's being discontinued. So PO48 is now becoming discontinued. And then also PR206, which is Quinacridone Maroon, or I think Daniel Smith calls it Quinacridone Burnt Scarlet. It goes by a few different names by different companies. I know Roman Schmall calls it Quinacridone Maroon. I think Core calls that colour Quinacridone Burnt Orange confusingly, but it's that PR206 pigment. So PO48 and PR206 are becoming discontinued. Now I think a lot of companies have a stockpile of those pigments, so they're not going to be like off the shelves immediately, but some brands like Roma Schmall have brought out another version of their Quin Gold which doesn't use the PO48, which is going to be discontinued. And I imagine some of these other brands are going to start reformulating their Quinacridone Gold pigments to not be using those discontinued pigments anymore. And then I have 4 other versions of Quinacridone Gold that don't use either of those pigments that are going to be discontinued. I have 4 versions of the PO48 pigment to look at today. So I have Quinacridone Burnt Orange from Daniel Smith, Quinacridone Rust from M. Graham. I have a Quinacridone Burnt Orange from Rembrandt in a palette. I don't have it in the tube anymore. And I have the Quinacridone Burnt Sienna, which is what Roma Schmall refer to Quinacridone Burnt Orange in their palette. And then I have 4 greens to look at that use this now becoming discontinued PO48 pigment. So we have Undersea Green, Sap Green and Deep Sap Green by Daniel Smith. All of these use PO48. And then I have the Sap Green by Nightshade Watercolors that uses the PO49 and PG7, which was the original combo that Daniel Smith used to use for their Sap Green. So I thought that'd be a fun comparison to have. And I do have some single pigment PR206 paints to look at as well, but I decided not to include that in this video because otherwise, I mean, as it is, we're already going to be swatching quite a lot of paints today, and I didn't want to make this video too long. I know people have commented saying that they prefer to see the swatching in real time, so today that is what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep the swatching in real time and add some commentary. I have my swatch sheets all ready to go, so this will be all the different versions of Quinacridone Gold. We're going to be swatching 15 of them today. And then, like I said, I have 4 Quinacridone Burnt Oranges and 4 variations of green that use that PO48 pigment as well. So we can take a look at what all of those look like. And yeah, so let's just jump into it. Okay, so for all the paints that I had in tubes, I've squeezed out little dots on this palette paper just because some of my paints are in palettes and pans, etc. So I wanted it to be fair comparison to go from dried paint for everything rather than using some dry, some fresh, etc. So I poured these dots out on the 27th of February. Today is now the 4th of March, so it's been almost a week. And yeah, so we'll see how they all re-wet as well. So we will start, I guess, with the original PO49 Quinacridone Gold. So we'll start with the Daniel Smith. Bear in mind this tube of paint is probably pretty old by this point. I'm not sure how old. It's definitely a few years old. I think it stopped becoming commercially available like in 2017, 2018 maybe, something like that. Okay. The brush I'm using is a new brush that I got a while ago, I just haven't used it yet. It's by Da Vinci and it's the Coloneo, I think, or Coloneo, and it's the size 8 round for anyone who's curious. And the paper I'm using is De La Rowney Langton Prestige in the rough surface texture. It's 100% cotton. So I'm going to give these paints the best opportunity to shine. So that's the original PO49 from Daniel Smith. And I'll go ahead and do the handmade watercolour PO49 as well. And that one looks a lot more orange straight off the bat than the Daniel Smith Quinacridone Gold. Okay. Alright, so now we've got, this is the current version that Daniel Smith sells. So it's essentially their hue, Quinacridone Gold, and this is made up of PY150 and PO48. I mean, in mass tone, that looks pretty close to me. I mean, on camera it looks a little bit different, but in real life they look pretty similar. I mean, as far as hues go, that's not terrible. It's a little bit more yellow in the wash than the original. But overall, I think that's a pretty fair approximation. Yeah, it definitely looks different on camera. In real life, it looks a little bit closer. Okay, then we have the M Graham. This is the Nickel Quinacridone Gold, is what they call it. And this is made up of PO48 and PY150. Sorry, today's Saturday and my husband's taking the kids out. And he's just sending me photos. That's why if you can hear my computer pinging, that's just his messages coming through. Alright, so this is the M Graham version. A little bit more water. M Graham, if you're unaware, uses honey as part of their binder, along with gum arabic and stuff like that. So it's definitely easier to re-wet, but it does mean it's one of those paints that doesn't fully dry on your palette either. Okay, then we have the core Quinacridone Gold. This one's also PO48 and PY150. I really like using Quinacridone Gold both on its own and in mixes. It just makes really beautiful greens, like really natural looking greens, because it is leaning towards that orange side, but it makes really beautiful greens. And then we have Da Vinci's Quinacridone Gold. This one uses PR206 and PY150. I mean, so far they're all really beautiful. No, I didn't really show it here, but the core Quinacridone Gold is, and most core paints are like this, moves really well in wet washes and like pushes other pigments from other brands out of the way, so it's a really nice one if you want that effect. I'd say the Da Vinci one's definitely more orange, and I guess that's because of the PR206 rather than using PO48. So we'll see how that looks with the other ones as well. So then we've got Winsor & Newton Quinacridone Gold. This one's PR206, PB19 and PY150. So this one also has like a Quinacridone Violet type pigment included. This one's a little bit harder on the re-wetting. It's not, I mean, probably doesn't look like it on camera, but I can just feel it's not letting go of the pigment as easily. This one definitely looks more yellow in the wash compared to some of the other ones we've done so far. I think you can see that on camera as well. Give it a good shot and a little bit more. Okay, then we have the Sennelier Quinacridone Gold. This was one of the first versions of this colour that I tried, and I really did enjoy it. This is made up of PR101 PY150 and PR206, again with that PR206 pigment that's also been discontinued. That one, a lot like the Winsor & Newton, has more of a yellow wash. Yeah, yellow undertone in the wash, I mean. Then we have the Jackson's Quinacridone Gold, and this has the exact same pigments as the Sennelier. There's a bit of a rumour going around that Jackson's watercolours are the same as Sennelier, but I've not seen anything, like any official sort of statements put out by Jackson's or Sennelier to say that that's the case, so I can't say for certain. All I can say is that the paints that I've tried, they are very similar, and a lot of them very curiously have exactly the same pigment mixes. Some don't, most do. So make of that what you will. I mean, just based on personal experience, I would say it's probably a good shot that Sennelier produces Jackson's paints, but I personally don't mind because I think Sennelier paints are great, and I really like that. And Jackson's paints are just cheaper than Sennelier, so that's even better if they're the same. So yeah, I'd say those two are pretty close. And then before we finish with those ones, I have a couple in the pans that I wanted to do. So first up, we're going to do the Roman Schmall Quinacridone Gold. Oops, upside down. So that was down here. Again, that really lovely orangey mass tone. Has a really nice sort of yellow undertone to it as well, and the lighter wash at the bottom, which I actually quite like in my Quinacridone Gold. I think you get a really nice range of colour. And then I'll just grab the Holbein. That one's here. And this one, sorry, the Roman Schmall was PO48 and PY150, as is the Holbein. They're both the same. And back to our little palette here, we have White Knights. They call theirs Indian Gold. Theirs is a mix, so these last four that we're swatching here don't use any pigments that are being discontinued. So the White Knights one uses PY150 and PR101. Cat hair on my paper. This one's definitely got that yellow undertone, but the mass tone's just not quite as bright, which some people might prefer. Then we have Schmincke Horodam, which is the same, PY150 and PR101. Now PR101 can have a number of different, you can have a number of different colours using that PR101 pigment. It's like an earth red colour, so it's hard to know exactly which version of that PR101 these brands are using. which may explain why these look different even if they're using the same pigments. The schminker one's not really wetting particularly well. There we go. It's better. I'm not being super scientific about this. Like I said, it's more just so we can see how they all look compared to each other on the page. And then I have the Michael Harding Quinacridone Gold. This one is PY150. Sorry, yeah, PY150 and PR209. So PR209 is typically called Quinacridone Red, or Daniel Smith calls it Quinacridone Coral. Thankfully that's a pigment that is not being discontinued, because I do really like that one. That's a really bright yellow in the undertone in the wash of this paint. And finally, for the Quinacridone Golds, we have the Turner Artist Watercolor one. It's probably the cheapest of all the tube paints. Other than Roma Schmall, which you can only buy in pans, all the others are available in tubes. And of all the currently available versions of Quinacridone Gold, I think this is the cheapest one. I mean, if you're buying from Jackson's in the UK, I would say that this is probably the cheapest one. I don't know about if you're in other countries, you might be able to find other versions cheaper. I'm not sure. But if you're enjoying this video, please give it a thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any videos. And if you are considering purchasing some Quinacridone Gold, I would kindly ask if you wouldn't mind using my affiliate links. They're below the video in the description box. It doesn't cost you anything extra, but it means that I get a small commission if you purchase using those links. My main affiliate link is with Jackson's, and they ship worldwide. And if it's your first time ordering with Jackson's, you get 10% off your first order as well. So yeah, like I said, it just gives me a small commission, doesn't cost you anything extra, and it helps out the channel, which I really appreciate. Okay, so I'm just going to take this tape on the edge off, because I only put this down to hold the paper onto the table so it wouldn't move around while I'm swatching. Then I'm going to pop this to the side and let it dry while we swatch the other colours. Sorry, not sure at what point the camera cut off. What I was saying was I really like this burnt orange sort of colour. I'm not a fan of like super bright oranges, but I really like this version, or this kind of orange, where it's a bit more muted, a bit more rusty sort of colour. So that was the Daniel Smith, and then next up we have the M. Graham Quinacridone Rust. So this is also PO48. Seems to get a nice deep mass tone with this one compared to the Daniel Smith variation. Yeah, this one's definitely deeper, a bit more muted, a bit darker. Okay, seems to be a bit of like sizing issue on the edge of this paper, so I'd ignore that like top edge, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. Okay, those are the ones that I had there. Let me just grab my Roma Schmall one. So that's this one. So that Roma Schmall calls theirs Quinacridone. So yeah, Quinacridone Burnt Sienna, or Burnt Sienna Quinacridone. I can't remember which way around they say it, but some combination of those three words. And again, this one has a slightly different tone. This one's a bit more similar to the Daniel Smith version. Which is interesting. I didn't realise, or I didn't think that the M. Graham version was that different to the Daniel Smith. And then I have the Rembrandt version, which is, I just have in this, the only one I have, the only version of it I have left is in this little pan. Ah! Throwing my brush around. This one's quite pretty as well. A little bit brighter. It's probably the brightest, like more, yeah, just the brightest version compared to the other brands. Okay, so those are the single pigment PO48s that I have in my palettes. And then moving on to the greens. So first up, I have the Daniel Smith Sap Green. You know what, let me just pop this here, then you can see what I'm doing as well. I really like how earthy and natural this one looks straight out the tube or pan. Definitely one of my favourite versions of this colour, that's for sure. It's just very usable right off the bat. And also it's easily tweaked by adding other colours to it. And that's made up of PY150, PO48 and PG7. So previously, when PO49 was still in production, this would have been made up of PO49 and PG7. Then we have Undersea Green. This one's made up of PO48, PY150 and PB29. So again, so it's basically Quinacridone Gold and Ultramarine Blue. And the Sap Green is essentially Quinacridone Gold and Phthalo Green. So both of these would have been made with PO49 before that became discontinued. And this is a really nice deep green. Bloody cat hair gets everywhere. And this is a really nice granulating colour as well. Hopefully that will show a little bit here. Put a bit of extra water on this swatch down here just so we hopefully get a chance to see some granulation. And then I have Deep Sap Green by Daniel Smith. This is made using PB27, which is Prussian Blue, and PO48, which is the Quinacridone Burnt Orange, if I'm not mistaken. Let me double check I wrote that down right. Yeah, PB27 and PO48. Again, this is a really nice sort of blue green, like a dark forest green. Sennelier has a colour called forest green, and this reminds me a lot of that one. And then finally, I have the Nightshade Watercolours Sap Green, which is made up of PO49 and PG7. It's just so vibrant. The other thing I'd say as well about the Nightshade watercolours is for what you get full pans from them, and their prices are very reasonable considering these are handmade paints, and especially the PO49, considering it's a discontinued pigment. It's, you know, can't complain at all about their pricing. I can't remember how much it was, but it was for the 4 pans, I think it was around $20 or so, maybe a bit more than that, but it was worth the price. Like, it was definitely really high quality paints, really pigmented, and definitely worth checking out. Like, I'm not affiliated with them or anything, I'm just a happy customer. And like I said, I'll have links to the video I did on their on those watercolors, on this watercolor set that I got. I mean, I bought the pans individually and put them together. If you're interested to learn more about those, I'll leave that link down below. All right, so I'm just going to wait for these swatches to fully dry, and then we'll come back and take a closer look at everything. Okay, so swatches are dry now, so we're back. I'll give you a little close-up of all the different colours. So yeah, now that it's dry, you can really see a difference between what was considered the original PO49, the Quinacridone Gold, and the new version by Daniel Smith. Like, the new version is, funnily enough, more orange and the original is more gold. So yeah, I could definitely see when people say that they preferred the old one, why they would say that. The M. Graham one is, I find this with M. Graham paints, they seem to have this interesting texture to them. Like, it's not granulation, but it just has this like texture. Let's see if I get that to focus. There we go. Not sure if you can see that. And then we've got the core, which is really nice. I think, again, a lot of these, I feel like the original Quinacridone Gold by Daniel Smith doesn't have as much of a tonal range. Like, it definitely has a range as a darker end and a lighter end, but compared to some of these hue versions, the mass tone is a lot darker, a lot more orange, and the wash is a lot lighter, a lot more yellow compared to the original one, which I think is interesting. In some respects, I find the hues are probably a bit more versatile and a bit more, you know, they have a bigger range of tonal value. Then the Da Vinci Quinacridone Gold, again, is a bit more similar to the original one in the sense that it doesn't have that tonal range, but it's definitely more orange than the original. The last few here look pretty similar. The Jackson's one doesn't look too dissimilar to the originals. The Sennelier one looks pretty similar as well. Again, their mass tones are darker. And it's interesting to see the original by Daniel Smith compared to the PO49 by Nightshade, how different these two are. Obviously, this is handmade, this is commercially made, and depending on how the pigment is treated, you can get very different colours. You can evidently see here between these two. It's a lot darker, a lot more orange compared to the Daniel Smith version. Like I said, the Daniel Smith is the only original version of PO49 that I have that was commercially produced. So I don't know how that would compare to other brands like Winsor & Newton or whoever else used to produce PO49. Romer Schmall and Holbein are the only other ones that use PO48, along with Daniel Smith, M. Graham and Core of the ones that I have. And I'd say these two are very similar, Holbein and Romer Schmall. And they're very similar to the Core. The Daniel Smith one seems to be a lot more subtle, I mean, at least in these swatches. And the M. Graham one has an interesting texture, but colour-wise looks very similar to these two as well. And then these last four use PR101 in their mixes, or PR209, and not either of the discontinued pigments. Out of all of them, I'd say the Michael Harding one is probably very similar to some of the other PO48 PY150 hues. So that's probably the closest approximation to these 5 here. The Turner one is a bit more like the Nightshade colour. It's very similar to the Da Vinci in tone. Whereas the Schminker and White Nights are definitely more muted. A lot more similar to the Daniel Smith, in my opinion. And a lot more similar to the original as well in that regard. So yeah, that's how these all stack up against each other. Let me know which one you think is which one you think. Which one is your favourite out of these that I've swatched here for you guys? I'd be interested to hear your opinions. I like quite a lot of them, and I think a lot of them, for like my purposes and what I use it for, a lot of them would work perfectly fine. I really like the range of the Roman Schmall and the Michael Harding in terms of like mass tone to wash. I like the warmth of the Da Vinci. I like the range of the core as well. That's definitely a new favourite. I really recently got the core Quinacridone Gold. I had the small 5mm tube of it from the High Chroma set, so I still have that in my core palette, but I didn't have a tube of it anymore, so that's definitely one I'm going to enjoy using. I love the subtlety and the warmth again of the Snelly and Jackson's one. They don't have that harsh colour change, like is a lot more subtle, the tonal variation there. And the original one is beautiful as well. I can really understand why people really enjoyed it or really liked it. And like I said, it's very interesting to see how different it is compared to the Nightshade one. I'd say actually the Nightshade PO49 is very similar. It's a lot closer in shade to the PO48s in some ways compared to the other Quinacridone Golds. I mean, it's definitely lighter, more orangey than these ones, or more yellow, I mean. But yeah, so those are all the Quinacridone Golds that I have access to at the moment, and my thoughts on them. I don't know, what do you think? I think I already asked you that. Anyway, please do let me know in the comments below. I'd be very curious. Like I said, I'll have links. I think most of these paints, other than Nightshade and Da Vinci, I think those are the only two. Oh, and White Nights now as well. You can't purchase those ones through Jackson's anymore. Da Vinci isn't sold in the UK, or at least nowhere that I've found it. And Nightshade, obviously, I'll leave a link to their website where you can order directly from them. And the White Nights, Jackson's aren't stocking them anymore, or at least once they've sold what stock they have, they're not selling anymore. And I don't believe they have this one in stock anymore. So, so yeah, that's most of these you can purchase from Jackson's, is what I was trying to say. And then the Quinacridone Burnt Oranges, so the PO48s. So yeah, these are actually all fairly different. They all look quite different. I'd say the Daniel Smith one had the largest drying shift, which is what I mentioned at the beginning as well. It's definitely my least favourite of them all, surprisingly. Which is good to know, because I thought I'd really like this one, but I'm not as big a fan of it as I thought I was. The Quinacridone Rust is just a completely different colour, and I'm not a fan of this sort of texture that the M. Graham paints give. It's definitely not my favourite thing. I do appreciate the re-wettability of M. Graham, but I'm not a huge fan of the texture you get from their paints. I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong. Am I doing something wrong? Is it my water? I think I've heard someone mention before that the water, the hardness of your water can have a real impact on M. Graham paints, so I don't know if that's true or not. Anyway, but I really like the Roman Schmall and the Rembrandt. I think they're fairly similar in colour, at least in real life they are. Maybe on camera they're a bit different. It's a slightly darker patch there, but I think that might just be user error in terms of how I applied the paint. But I feel like the Daniel Smith one looks that little bit more washed out once dry. I don't know. Let me know what you think. Which is your favourite out of these four? Or do you have another version of PO48 that you really like that you think I should check out? Because I'd like to check it out before it goes out of stock, if you think there's a better version of this pigment that I haven't swatched here today. And then finally, just a quick look at some of the greens using that PO48 pigment, or PO49 in the case of this sap green. Yeah, I mean, they're all beautiful, and the undersea green has given us a little bit of that granulation. You can see that ultramarine blue separating out there in the wash a bit. I don't really have much to say about the greens. I could do a whole video on greens and different shades of greens. I could do several videos about the colour green and green watercolour paints. So I'm not going to ramble on about that for too long today. Just wanted to give you those examples. But yeah, so that's everything for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what your thoughts are down below. Did you find this helpful? Are you planning on stocking up on some Quinacridone Gold or Quinacridone Burnt Orange before it goes out of stock? Let me know which are your favourite versions, and I will see you guys next time. Take care. Bye.